In the workshop today we've got this larch. Any of you who have been following me for any period of time will remember this. It's 2 years ago now that I took it off a slab and put it into this pot. And if you remember, I said at the time it was a very weak tree. This has been planted on this rock, or growing in this rock, since the early 1980s. And when I obtained the tree about 4 years ago, it was very weak. It hadn't been touched for decades, and it was in the tiniest little amount of soil. So all I did was lift it off the slab it was on and put it into this pot. The video's on the channel. You can go back and watch it. But today the tree is ready for its next step. Now, any of you who remember that video will immediately notice there's a lot less of this tree than there was at that initial repotting. And when we take a closer look, I'll explain what's been happening with this, because we've lost one or two branches that were very weak and have died off. But in general, the tree's done very well. It's filled that pot with root, and it's actually started to lift itself out. It's got a mass of root, and what's happened is gradually over the last 2 years the old weak growth has died off in favour of the much newer, stronger stuff. And so let's just have a look at the buds on this, and I'll explain to you what's been going on and how I know that this is ready to take the next step. So with a larch like this that's been growing in severely restricted circumstances for a long period of time, you find that the growth habit actually changes, and it stops making extension growths like this, and it just goes to make these little buds. And what they do every year, they leaf out, and the end of it opens up, you just get a little rosette of needles, and that just sits on top of that bud, and it just soaks up as much sunlight as it needs. And when the circumstances of the tree are particularly straightened, you'll find that it stops making any significant extension, and it just makes those little rosettes of needles, and it makes an awful lot of cones. It makes a lot of flowers, because obviously it can't grow, but it can still produce seed. And that's what's happened. So you can see absolutely hundreds and hundreds of these little tiny buds. And if we take a really close look at some of those, if we come down to here, you can see that bud's got lots of little rings around it, and each one of those rings is 1 year. And what's happened is the bud's opened, it's made its little rosette of needles, and then at the end of the year there's another bud ready to do the same thing in the next year. So where you see these, and each one of these little rings is 1 year. So for instance, if we come up in here, you can see there, that little twig there has probably got over 20 years in it, and that's barely 1.25 inches long. And this tree was completely covered in those buds, and it was making flowers, and it was making hundreds of cones. Now, I'm okay with larch making cones, it's what they do. So I've not been too fanatical about pulling those off. I have now cut off what was left here from the previous couple of seasons, so because we're going to get in and do some styling on this today. But if we look at some of these buds, if we take this one, you can hopefully just about see there the base of that was making those little rosettes, and then all of a sudden here's an extension growth. So it's grown from this point up to the end here in the last season, and that shows me that that tree is starting to recover, because quite a few of these little rosette buds have actually reverted back now to extension buds. And that's because the tree's lot in life has improved. It's got more roots, it's got more nutrient, and so it can grow a little bit more. Bearing in mind here we're in the lowest part of the tree, but if we come up halfway up, look at this bud here, and you can see loads and loads of little rings on there, and then all of a sudden at this point he's thrown out this nice long extension. And as we come up the tree towards the top, you can see a lot of those extensions getting nice and big and thick. So that shows me this tree is starting to turn a corner. You can see all the little buds that were barely growing at all, and lots of them are now starting to throw out new extension growths. So that shows me that the tree is really happy. And also, if we come down here and we look at the pot, I know it's hard to see under all the dead leaves, but you can see the roots there right out at the edge. And in the summer this lifted itself out of the pot about 3/4 inch. It's settled back a little bit since the winter and the cold weather. So this tree is fighting fit. You can see lots of new extension growth. At this point, if we come up to the top, you can see we've got buds really big and really strong. Now let me just show you a couple of twigs and you can see the difference between the weaker growth and the stronger growth perhaps a little bit more clearly. So on the bench here are the two little twigs I've just pruned off this tree from different positions. And the first one, this is all the last season's growth. You can see there's about 5-6 inches there, but you can see it's very small and there's no terminal bud on there. It didn't make up at all, but lots and lots of little tiny side buds. And then if we look at this one, this has grown in exactly the same time period, but look how much thicker it is. And when we come to the end, we've got a great big extension bud on there. So that is a branch that's going to grow extremely strongly, we can do a lot with. This one, less so, but it's significantly better than the little rosette buds that we had to start with. And so once we start to see this type of growth across the whole tree, we know that it's turned a corner. So at the time I previously repotted this tree, I didn't prune anything away, I just left everything that was there because there were stronger branches and weaker branches, and I knew that over the intervening couple of years we were going to have some changes. The tree was going to make some choices, and it did exactly that. So particularly in the upper part, we lost a lot of small branches. Most of the ones we lost only had a few buds on, and with larch it's really important to have a lot of buds on each individual branch, because if we get to a point where there are a fairly insignificant number of buds, very often that branch or that twig will dry out and stop growing in favour of something that's much stronger. And so we did lose quite a few branches along here. But one of the most significant things, if you go back and look at the previous video, was we used to have a big branch here. It was quite a big, significant long branch, and it was a good thick size as well. And over the summer after this was repotted, that branch sort of leafed out and it just made little rosettes, and then it stopped. Nothing else happened at all. And then by the end of the season, that branch was starting to go a little bit yellow, and by the end of the year that branch was completely dead. And now that grew from here, and I've taken it away obviously, and you can see made a little shari beneath it, just left a little gin, a little snag there, and so that branch has been removed. After I removed it, I noticed there was a big knuckle just a couple of inches down the branch, and when I peeled the bark off that, I found the reason why this branch failed. And it's significant because it goes to doing good quality work at the time that we do it with an eye on the future. What somebody had done was taken this branch, which was obviously straight, and they'd wrapped some wire around it, and then they'd used that wire to pull that down. Well, now I do that all the while and there's no problem with that, but what somebody had done is wrap the branch, or wrap the wire along the branch to secure it, and then just pulled one end down. But then that wire had been left and it had started to dig in, and because it circled the branch, it cut off the sap flow, and over the years, as that's progressively swollen as a result of the wound that was inflicted, it swelled and swelled and it got really big. But when I got down about halfway down inside the wood, you could see the way they'd wrapped the wire had completely cut off the sap flow apart from about 1/4 of an inch, and so that whole branch that was right out to here was surviving on 1/4 of an inch of the whole circumference of the branch. That was the only live part, and it wasn't enough to feed all the buds. And so as soon as the tree started to sense that things were getting better and it was time to do some growing, this branch wasn't giving back what it was taking, and so the tree cut it off. And so unfortunately we've lost that one. And so, you know, that's what happens with these old trees. Sometimes people do things and then years down the road somebody like me comes along, starts to improve things, and the next thing you know, it's cost us quite dearly some poor technique in the past. It's not the end of the world. It kind of doesn't detract from the tree significantly. Plus I've got this big one here, and while this is really hard, I think I've got a good idea to use a little piece of rebar to start bending this one back round into this position. Because what this branch has done has opened up this this side of the tree, whereas previously we had a front round here. Because this branch has gone, it's slightly moved the front a little bit. It makes the tree look more attractive from this angle rather than from in front, or in the front of the pot here. And so what I'm going to do is use a little bit of rebar, pull this around, and I'm going to work through this. We're going to reposition some of these branches, which is going to be quite difficult because a lot of them have got previous damage, small amounts of dead wood in. So we're going to have to work quite carefully. But what I want to do today with this really is lay in the bones for the future. This tree has never had a full-on styling. It's always just done by tying the odd branch down, a little bit of wire here, a little bit of wire there. But Now we're going to go through this entire tree, because I know that everything on here is healthy and it's not going to be shedding any more branches, and so it's time to start to build the future structure of this tree. This is by no means going to be a finished tree in a day. So taking a look at this tree from the side, you can see we've got the end of the pot, and that's the place that the big branch was lost, and that branch filled the space from here to here. So it's very difficult to see on the camera here, but it's left a great big hole in there. But we've got this whacking great big one, which, as you can see, heads out on the back side of the tree. Now generally larch are made of butter and they bend as easily as anything, but because this tree is old, this is extremely hard to bend. I can barely move that with my hand. And there's a lot of sapwood, there's a lot of heartwood in there and not a lot of sapwood. A larch like this can be intensely brittle. It's a bit like trying to bend a plastic Bic pen. It's just got to shatter, and that's what's going to happen with this branch. So what I'm not going to do is slap big wire on here and try and raffia and try and manhandle that, because it's going to break, and because the sapwood is still relatively thin, it's not going to move the way I want it. But where we lost this branch, I've got a little deadwood here, so what I'm going to do is anchor a bar off here, and then we're going to just gradually start to pull this towards the front. This branch will move a long way over a period of time, but it's not going to do it in a day. So what we're going to do is use this as one anchor point for our rebar, and there's a little hole there, look. Now that's where something's been removed, and we're going to anchor the other end of the rebar there, because part of the problem I've found is if I pull too hard on this anchored to this secondary trunk, all it's going to do is move the trunk forwards. But I've got a little way to deal with that, because like I say, bending this branch in one go is not going to be feasible. I'm going to end up at best with a crack in it. But you can see from here it needs to move forwards. So let's just have a look at how I'm going to set that up. So setting up the first anchor point for this rebar, we've got this little hole here. There's a little dead bit in there, and the first thing we want to do is just pop a little pilot hole in there. So just use a small drill to get a little hole in there, just to get that started, and then a little eyelet that goes in the hole. Just screw that in there, and then that's going to anchor the rebar just where I need it. So that's really tight in there. Putting a screw like that in a tree doesn't really hurt it, and particularly with a larch, as soon as that screw comes out, it'll grow over in a few weeks, heal up and be absolutely fine. So the next part of this process is a little piece of wood. It's a little flat end on one end, and then I've used a knob cutter to cut a groove out of the other end, and that's just going to seat the bar. So let me just set this up and you can see how it's going to work. So here we have the completed setup. There's the eyelet. Here comes the rebar. Here's a little block of wood. Press it against the shari, or the dead wood there, so nothing to worry about there. And then out to the end, here we've got our little loop of copper wire, and that's wrapped around a rubber tube. And so you can see from the side, that gives us a point to pull from. Now I almost never use a rebar for bending branches, but and here we are, 2 in a row if you watch the last pine video. But the way I want to pull this branch coming forwards, there's nothing here to anchor it to, and because wiring along it is not really an option, this is the best way to do it, and it allows me to pull this nice and slowly over a period of time to reposition this branch. So now this tourniquet is set, we'll just begin to apply some pressure. So we've got a little twisted end here with a tourniquet, a pair of gym pliers, and what we do is pull, you'll see the branch move, and then we twist the wire. So give that a little pull and a twist, and a pull and a twist, pull and a twist. So you can see already that branch starting to move quite a significant distance, and rather than keep on going, it's very tempting to keep pulling and pulling and pulling, but if we do, we're going to break it. So we'll just leave that pressure on there, and then perhaps later in the day or maybe tomorrow we'll come back and give that a little bit more. And then when it's moved so far, we're going to have to reposition things, but this will get a significant bend in this over the coming growing season. So one of the things that's important when you're doing a bend like this is to know your branch. And on these old trees, they're very, very good at disguising and hiding old damage, and you never quite know what you've got. But this part of the branch, while extremely hard, you can see looks fairly clean. The primary weakness on this branch, if I can get in and show you, is this fork. Here's the main branch and here's a side branch, and I'm pulling in this direction, and you can see there's a little crack just in the armpit of that branch. Now that's not a crack, that's just how the branches grow, but since I've just pulled that, that's opened up a little bit. Now what that's doing, what that means is the main bend that I've put in so far is coming on this lower part of the branch, and it's not significantly bent this piece. But with a gentle pressure, progressively that piece will give. It will take the pressure off this weakness, and then I can give it a little bit more of a bend. But if I just keep pulling and pulling and pulling, this little piece here has got to part company. And while it's not the end of the world, it will then callus and cause a swelling. So that's why we go gently, gently on bends like this. So I'm now going to start wiring this tree, and a lot of these little rosette buds I show you are quite brittle and can be broken off quite easily, so I'm going to have to be careful in that respect. But you can see the buds here, they're really big. This is just going to grow like crazy over the coming summer. I'm not going to wire every last thing, just the bits that are necessary. Like I say, we are literally just putting a foundation in here, so time to break some wire out, I think. Finished the wiring of this tree, and now I just need to look at the apex of this slightly smaller trunk. And as you can see, we've got at least 3 really big branches all coming out of one place. This particular one has grown like absolutely crazy. What's in my hand is just last year's growth, so you can see that's really thick. But what's happening here is there's so much coming out of one point, it's all starting to get a little bit thick, and as the years go by that's just going to get worse and worse. So what I need to do is try and figure out some what I'm going to use and what I'm going to get rid of. The first thing that I really want to take out is this one, which seems a little odd, but you'll have to trust me. It's got lots of damage in it from previous cuts. You can see this piece has died off on its own, and there's lots of little stumpy buds on there. It's not a bad branch, but it's just the wrong thing in the wrong place, so we have to get rid of that. So we just pop that. So take that out. Just out of interest, you can see there the thickness of the bark versus the sapwood. The little yellow line there is the sapwood. The rest of that is all bark. So what I'm going to do is chew that off, chew that down with a knob cutter, because if I leave a little gin, the bark will just try and grow over it, and it'll just cause that swelling to get even worse. So with that one gone, what we're going to do is use this one, and that's going to come down and fill this front area. This one is going to be the apex, and this big vigorous one is going to come down the back to fill this area where I've got no branches at all. Now the other things that we can snip out, we've got this little one here, which is not doing very much. Where is it? There you can see, not much on that. This little guy here, because that's just coming out of the base of that branch. And coming around, there's a couple of other little pieces I can get in there and take away. Clean that through so we can get in there, get the wire in, off there, Tiny one there. These buds that emerge from the actual trunk itself, we don't want. They're going to grow really fast, and what I need to do here is encourage the growth onto this part because they're all nice strong live shoots. So just with that quick prune and a couple of cuts, you can see that's much improved. Over the years this tree has lost a lot of branches, and so there have been a lot of cuts. Most of them were dealt with badly and we've had to clean those out previously. This one here, I've just given that another trim, but I thought I'd just show you how we take this back. So using a knob cutter, we just chew that away in several small pieces. Don't try and take it in one bite. A knob cutter will pull into the branch and you could end up going in a lot deeper than you wanted to. There's a little bit of dead material around the outside, just dried out bark. So now that pale piece is the only piece that's actually wood. All the rest of this is bark. So using the knob cutter, press into it, chop, get a nice clean cut. And now you can see that's really sunken. I'm going to lose the whole end of my finger in there. Because larch has such thick bark, when you make a cut that you want to heal over, it's important that you take it really deep like this so that you can, when it does grow over, it won't be visible. So taking a look at this from the side, you can see that's quite heavily undercut. And then the last thing we want to do is just seal that up with some cut paste. Just pop that in there and then press that in really hard. It doesn't need to be thick, but press it in nice and hard so that that seals that cut completely, and that'll stop that drying out and going any further. I'm not sealing up the one underneath because there's nothing live been exposed there. So now you can see, even with the cut paste in there, that's still very slightly undercut, and so as that heals it's going to become pretty much invisible after a few years.